Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Busting COBOL to Cloud Myths. My name is Gregory Saxton. I'm CTO of CloudFrame. Appreciate everyone joining us here today. I don't think anyone would disagree. It's hard enough to transform an application. It is difficult. These mainframes are massive in terms of the application footprint they serve or they run, and the number of upstream and downstream dependencies is it often is just like the most difficult puzzle to figure out how to untangle all these interdependencies. The myths we're about to talk about today, they just make it harder. So the unreasonable man. It's an interesting quote. I found myself drawn to this about 10 years ago in my role as a chief architect at LexisNexis. Quite a few of the folks that I would work with across the technology, the product and operations teams on a global scale would tell me, that my boss was being unreasonable. His strategy was difficult, and all the reasons why it wasn't possible. LexisNexis had an amazing mainframe to cloud journey. And my takeaway from that is if you are going to be successful, you had damn well better be prepared to be unreasonable. We're going to talk through these 11 myths. If you've taken this journey, if you know someone who has, worked with somebody who's doing it, you're going to recognize a few of these, 3, 4, 5, maybe even all of them, depending on when you tried to solve the problem. Myth 1, fast results are impossible. Let me tell you what some of our customers are doing. So our telecom customer executed a proof of concept on the mainframe. At the end of month 3, it was done. The business case was written, approved, and funded to save $2 million annually over a 12-month period. We have other customers that are doing similar things, and I'll save some of that and sprinkle it on throughout the rest of the presentation. The point is that you can deliver incrementally, sustainably, and that's something that is good. Tools can't solve all your problems. Let's just get that myth solved and dispelled right out of the onset here. I'm a tool vendor, and I'm telling you there are no silver bullets. Absolutely automate everything, but don't ignore an opportunity to modernize that makes business sense, not just technology sense. Don't ignore that opportunity because a tool doesn't solve 100% of the problems, right? You can't solve these mainframe to cloud problems by just pressing a button. Sort of reminds me of this cartoon I watched as a kid, The Jetsons, and the main character, George Jetson, all he did at work was press one red button. There's no easy button for this. It takes a level of effort. I love when somebody says, you'll only be successful if, right? There's maybe a few things in life. If you're crossing a busy highway, you increase your likelihood of success if you look both ways first. But modernizing a mainframe system to be a cloud-based system, there's no simple rule. Even though we're talking through 11 myths today, I'm sure somebody else would come up with a 12th or a 13th, and they're not all applicable all of the time. They're situational. Some of them become more significant at other points in time. What I've seen as what makes these modernizations successful is the intentional architecture and design, the sort of risk weighting, the conscious planning around scoping and sequencing of work, and really vigilant execution. This notion of an incremental approach. Think about the telecom customer that I shared early, right? You want to lock in rewards early, and you want to deliver rewards frequently to your sponsors and stakeholders. I love this statement, JOBOL. I actually found this on an Amazon Web Services site. I've seen examples of this, and in many cases, it's true. It's true if you convert COBOL to .NET too, in some instances, because the tools that have been out there have taken, different approaches, and some tools have, been better than others. But the moral of the story is that it's difficult to write a tool that converts from one language to another, particularly a language as different, as COBOL is from a modern object-oriented language like Java. But I'm not going to name names here because I have friends and colleagues that I have deep respect for at a few of these companies. I will foreshadow, CloudFrame isn't JOBOL. The takeaway here is trust but verify, right? Use those third-party assessments, tools like SonarQube, Black Duck, White Source, Embold, check marks. You could just Google these things, and there's lots of them out there. Most importantly, you probably employ a lot of smart people. You're probably very smart yourself. Do code reviews. Look at the technical debt that remains between where the code generator left off and what you would describe as good. Include that effort, that time and cost as part of your total business case, and really think about, does it make sense, right? Because only then do you get an apples to apples comparison with greenfield. And if you want to use the tool, then you've proven the business case. And if you don't want to use the tool, you've proven why it's a bad investment. So this is the greenfield or rewrite analogy, and this applies to SaaS or COD adoptions too. It's really tough to say, hey, I'm going to go away for 18 to 36 months, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to drop this big change on all of my stakeholders, my operations teams, my customers, and it's going to be beautiful. Trust me. You need to find the sweet spot around incremental value delivery. And while you're doing that, you need to avoid the second system syndrome. Second system syndrome, you can Google it very simply. When it takes so long to deliver the modern system, often what happens is you're not making any changes to that legacy system. Well, the business isn't a static, unchanging thing. Your customers and suppliers, your ecosystem is always evolving, demanding more, demanding different. And what ends up happening is before you've even finished modernizing, you're layering on new requirements, just expanding the scope and increasing the risk. And when all is said and done, that modernization just gets defunded, and now you've got new requirements on your second system that you can't implement in your legacy system. And now instead of having a new system, you have a little bit of a new system and an old system. Big bang backloaded business cases don't work. And it's called Big Bang for a reason. If you think about the singularity that created the universe for which nothing survived, is that really the metaphor that you want to use for modernization? I would not want to be thinking about my career from the perspective of a project that will kill it. I've touched on this a few times, myth 6, right? One of my favorite Rocky quotes: time takes everybody out. Projects that take forever will take somebody out. They may take a lot of people out. Talked about this before, right? Intentional architecture and design, scoping and sequencing of work, locking in rewards early, delivering rewards consistently and frequently. That's your recipe for success. This is not a recipe for success. Trying to do business process optimization, rewrite your system, and convert all your data from a mainframe data architecture to a Unicode ASCII architecture all at once. What if you could pivot from COBOL to Java, rehost your system into a cloud environment, take advantage of cloud native services and elastic compute without changing your data? Being able to have data coherency with upstream and downstream systems without implementing a lot of middleware and introducing cost and risk. you'd be able to de-risk, you'd be able to lock in huge gains, you'd be able to take advantage of modern DevOps tool chains and really enhance productivity and team harmony and team morale. And you'd be able to execute much more quickly in that new environment. You can do that. And if you did that, you would deliver tremendous value to your business sponsor and your stakeholders, and they would in turn have tremendous confidence in you, as would your team. Now imagine what you could do with the cost savings you've locked in, those recurring monthly and annual cost savings, a confident team and a confident stakeholder and sponsor community. You could put in place the right operating model, the right microservices strategy, and you could figure out which services own which data entities and which data needs to flow through an eventual consistency architecture to different services. You could work with your sponsors, your partners, your business on what are the policies and service levels around your eventual consistency architecture. Then you could start taking and adopting well-worn patterns for using API lifecycle management to introduce new APIs and obsolete old APIs. What would those APIs be doing? Your new APIs would be serving up your migrated data, your UTF-8 ASCII data. Meanwhile, your legacy APIs talking to legacy upstream and downstream systems would be gradually strangled out. And you could do all this by shrinking the blast radius of change to a single data entity inside a single, a microservice. It's possible. We're working with customers that have done this. I've seen this done in my past. Performance will suffer. So if any of you have been in a demo with me, you've seen me demo a mainframe COBOL DB2 batch report. It's called Demo Book. And I'll run that on our Z15 at our IBM Texas data center. And what's interesting is the COBOL load module takes about 3 to 4 seconds of cycle time, depending on how busy the physical is and how much time our LPAR is getting. Now, when I run the Java code, again, depending on how much contention there is for zip, it could run at the same time, a few seconds longer. Well, I did a demo yesterday where I downloaded that Java code to my Mac and I ran it accessing DB2 over the public internet. Guess what? It ran in 1/3 the time faster. So instead of 3 to 4 seconds, it ran in 2 seconds. So yeah, there's some performance at scale problems that we'll need to solve, but don't just assume because you're moving off the big iron or you're moving to Java that things are slower. That may have been true 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Ain't true no more. Funding. There seems to be this fundamental disconnect often between central architecture teams when they're putting together a technology strategy and working across the technology organization on a vision of the future and the reality of economics and what you can afford to invest as a business entity and what really makes sense from a return on investment perspective. And what we find probably 80% of the time is the systems that you're looking to modernize, you're not looking to make any fundamental changes to the business logic or the business rules or the data, other than maybe improve data quality, which is a constant, right? So you say to yourself, if you're not looking to make any changes to your logic, to your business rules, or to your data, then why the hell would you start from scratch and greenfield that system and risk changing any or all of it, right? That's a system that you throw at an automated tool to do the conversion. You focus your talented teams on the problems where you need to work in the white space and introduce change or differentiated value. You don't throw your best talented team at solving a problem a machine can solve. Just think about that, because you'll never find the funds because it's just not investable. And if you do find the funds, you've you've risked a good chance of doing harm to your business because you've allocated funds to something that really they shouldn't have been invested in. I hope this statement or this myth is so obvious to everyone on today's call, right? Mission critical apps are the business. They have been layered with new systems of engagement, with mobile apps, with APIs, with web applications and different technologies that we've experienced these with over the years. Even at ATMs in the 80s, that was a really cool thing. Most people were shocked when they realized 20 years ago they were still running OS2 and talking LU62 to CICS backends, in the age of the internet. So enough said. Our last myth: you can get identical results. Code is code, whether it's written from scratch or automated. You just need to be able to produce the same output given the same input. We've all done this before. We've rewritten code. We've changed from one language to another. The challenge that I think some organizations struggle with when they think about using, somehow modernizing a system, they reject a machine doing part of the work or an algorithm doing part of the work. Just like some people have a natural trust or distrust of artificial intelligence or machine learning. So another myth busted. We're able to prove that customers can achieve identical results. Just pause here for a second and take a drink.
Yeah. Wow, Greg, you've taken us through a lot of myths and talked about how we bust those. I want to just interject real quickly the results of the poll that you responded to. Thank you for doing that. We had two myths that seem to be exposed within most organizations, with the majority of the votes going to talent and resources being the biggest myth that exists around modernization with organizations, followed closely by risk. Risk being the issue that seems to come up, that modernization and mainframe COBOL applications are kind of like a hot stove with a do not touch flag on it, a sign that says you're going to get burned, but people still put their hands on it. But I think that myth is slowly starting to evolve and devolve and get busted as we get more sophisticated and we have better tools that go into resolving that. I noticed as we went through the myths, Greg, when you were busting these, that there were probably 3 or 4 kind of themes that ran central to them. I heard using automation everywhere you can, taking an incremental approach, producing quality Java assets, and the ability, as the slide says, to get to that precision, the equivalent results, so that you can compare the results from one platform to another. And I think those are great themes, but they're not hypotheticals. And I think that you're going to take us through this. They're not hypothetical situations where we're busting these myths. These actually are things that we can come up against and solve. And hopefully you're going to talk a little bit about that. I know that you have a case study that you're going to share with us. And I want to talk about maybe what that customer thought when they entered into that project and how we were help them get over the myths that they had around modernizing their mainframe application. So Greg, maybe you can take us through that.
Sure, David, thank you. So CloudFrame Renovate. CloudFrame has 2 products. Renovate is one of them. What does Renovate do? Renovate is a piece of software. It helps customers fully automate refactoring their COBOL legacy systems into Spring Boot and Spring Batch services. CloudFrame worked with a card network. These are the companies whose logos are on the plastic in your wallet. Global company, and they were looking at how do they modernize their system. And as you could imagine, they've just massive system processing massive volumes of data, millions of transactions, maybe billions of transactions in the holiday season. And What was interesting about this use case was the way in which the system was deployed. So it's a mainframe COBOL application that is basically doing validation of the credit card charges. The folks on the inside called these card swipes, back before we had chips and we would all sort of swipe our cards. And apparently those little card readers, they produce a lot of erroneous data. So it's critical to make sure the data, conforms to type and class and that it's valid. So what would happen is the card network would share this system with the merchant banks that would issue their cards so that they could, catch errors sooner, and banks could correct them. And that was helpful for banks in that business. I guess I don't claim to understand their business entirely. And in smaller banks, typically outside the US, they ran that system on Windows under Micro Focus COBOL. And and our customer was looking for a way to not just get to Java, but get out of Micro Focus COBOL because they had some pain points around that. So you have a mainframe COBOL system running for a card network, running with merchant banks on mainframes and on Windows under Micro Focus. And our customer has a journey to completely get out of COBOL, get off the mainframe, be in a Java as a service cloud neutral environment. But they have this, interim strategy where they need to be able to run on-prem, and obviously they need to be able to just keep running their business. So what the first phase of work was could we help them and take this system where the system of record is mainframe COBOL, and instead of pushing it into Micro Focus COBOL and then they make a bunch of changes to that code to run it in that environment, could they push it through CloudFrame Renovate? And if they did that, what would they then have to do to it, like they've been doing to the Micro Focus code, so that it would run on Windows? And they figured, hey, we have 7 million lines of code. It would be great if we didn't have to change more than 10% of the code because, well, that's 700,000 lines of code. That's a lot of code. And they had a tight deadline. They're looking to get this done in less than a year. I believe the team was around 6 or 8 people. And what we did was, typical things. We go through our onboarding, we have a kickoff, we install the tool, and we converted all 7 million lines of code in about 45 minutes on a laptop with rotational disk. We celebrated. We had functionally certified the system in 2 months. And what does that mean? It means that the Java code that CloudFrame generated was producing identical results to the COBOL system. They did not need to change a single line of Java code that CloudFrame generated. We then went into non-functional requirements and performance requirements. That took about another 2 months. And we did go through a fair amount of optimizations. We learned a lot about the code we generate operating at the scale that we needed to. So it was an exciting journey for us. And when all is said and done, this overall level of time and effort finished in about 1/4 of the time that was planned. Think about that. How often have you heard of a modernization project finishing ahead of schedule under budget? Now, what was really cool was we solved the problem of eliminating micro focus in the deployment, but we also helped them in a fully automated way on their accelerated journey to an event-driven as a service architecture. Because the way our tool works is it's all configurable. So we were able to change our code generation templates, no changes to our code, and convert batch file processing over to Kafka topic processing. And they were able to bring that up in their cloud environment, and it worked. The legacy system was now processing on topics instead of flat files. So an absolutely huge success. So think about that. Fully automated, A-rated code based on Sonar cubes, default built-in quality gates. A big surprise for this team as they moved from COBOL to Java, right? DevOps pipelines have automated test case generation requirements. We generated the JUnit test cases for them, guaranteed functional and data equivalency, and perform as fast or faster.
Wow. Greg, that's a great case study there. It looks like we busted a lot of myths as we went through that. Imagine they were quite surprised and pleased with the results that we got.
Absolutely, David.
As that goes to the reputation that CloudFrame's building, as we engage more and more customers, I think that there are, a couple of big picture ideas that they come away with when they're introduced to CloudFrame and actually get to see us go solve these problems. And those two are self-funded modernization, this concept that you can actually take steps to generate funding for your complete modernization project. And the other big picture idea is incremental approaches. Can you maybe talk about those two things and end our webinar on those two big picture ideas?
Yeah, sure, David. So CloudFrame's other product is called Relocate. And Relocate is for customers that have, mainframe COBOL workloads where they're not looking to move to Java. They want to stay in COBOL. They don't want to make any changes. They just want to see their bill go down for their MSU and their MLC. And what CloudFrame Relocate does is you integrate it with your mainframe build system, and we will run your COBOL code as Java. We're backwards compatible with mainframe data, and our Java code can integrate with load modules. Now, even though it's Java, the systems on the mainframe remain in COBOL. It's all behind the scenes. We have customers in telecom, insurance, oil and gas, financial services, all doing this. Now, what some of them are doing is they're reinvesting that savings that they're getting into funding the modernization like the card network has done. And it is this incremental self-funding approach that we continue to evangelize because we help you find the funding. So the takeaway here is ignore the myths. They're just that. Be unreasonable in your expectations. Think differently. Reflect on what we've shared here today, and sincerely, take an iterative approach and strongly consider the merits of a self-funded journey. There's just not a reason to ask for tens of millions of dollars and years of time. And we're working with the big cloud providers out there as well, and they're pretty excited about the proposition that we bring to the market.
I'd like to end by saying thank you very much for joining us. This is an ongoing series where CloudFrame is bringing educational and informative information to our audience, those interested in modernization, and we hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation.